this video, we're going to learn how to use the if structure to allow the computer to make decisions based off the answers to yes and no questions. So in a previous video, we saw how to use logical operators, relational logic operators, and Boolean logic operators to conduct conditional statements. The real power of conditional statements is when we use those as the controlling attribute of a conditional structure. So what's a conditional structure? Basically, a conditional structure allows us to use those conditional statements, or those yes or no questions, to control whether certain sets of code execute. Essentially, we would have something that looks like this, where we have the rest of our program coming down, we ask a yes or no question, and then based on the answer to that question, we choose to do one of two sets of code. The key with the conditional structures is that we can only execute one of those sets of code. We couldn't execute both of them. So the main conditional structure we have available to us in Matlab, and really in most programming languages, is the if structure, which looks something like this. So we start out with if being our keyword for this type of structure in Matlab. And then next to the if, we have some type of conditional expression or conditional statement. Okay, so we could say if A is equal to 5, if B does not equal to 0, right? We can construct some type of conditional statement and use that as the expression for our if structure. If that condition turns out to be true, we would then execute whatever Matlab statements are included within our if structure. Okay? So this is how we determine whether those commands get executed or not. Basically, any commands that are listed there between the if and the end statement will be included in that if structure and only executed when the expression is true. We can then have additional statements afterwards, or actually we could have statements before the if structure as well. But if the condition evaluates to be false, or the answer to our question is no, then Matlab is going to skip over the commands inside the if structure and then simply proceed with the commands afterwards. So what happens if you wanted to have the option to choose between two different sets of commands, not just execute a set of commands or skip over it? For that, we use the if-else structure. You can see here the basic structure looks pretty similar to what we saw for just the plain if structure, but now we have an additional keyword, else, and an additional set of commands. So it basically operates the exact same way, where if the expression evaluates to a true, then we'll execute the Matlab commands that are included in the if portion of the structure. If the expression evaluates to false, then we would go through and execute the commands associated with the else portion of the structure. Notice that there is no condition for the else. The else's condition is the opposite of the if expression or the if condition. Okay? So for instance, if you said if A is greater than 5, the implicit condition would be for the else, x is less than or equal to 5. Okay, so you just use the opposite expression for the else, but you never actually specify a condition there. Okay, it's always just else and then your set of commands. So as you're going through your code and you've reached this point, you would evaluate the expression. Matlab would then either execute the commands in the if or the commands in the else, and then proceed with the rest of the Matlab commands afterwards. Okay, in this case, you have to perform one of the two options. Okay, so we've seen with the if, we can choose to execute a set of commands or not. With the if-else, we can choose between two sets of commands. But what happens if we want to choose between multiple sets of commands? For that, we use the if-ELSEIF structure. Okay, so again, similar setup to what we saw for the previous examples, but now we have the else if keyword. Now for this one, it's not like the else where we don't have an expression. Here we do have to have an expression, but it's going to be different than the if expression. Okay, so how this works, if the first expression evaluates to true, then we'll execute the set of Matlab commands associated with the if. If that one evaluates to false, then we check expression 2 and check to see if that is true. If that one is true, then we execute the Matlab commands associated with the else if statement. If that one evaluates to false, then we go to the else and we execute whatever commands are associated with the else statement. Okay, so now in the way that this one is set up, we have three possible sets of commands that we could perform. We have essentially three conditions, although we only define two. In this case, the else's condition is the opposite of both expression 1 and expression 2. Right, so trying to express that out as an actual Matlab statement could get kind of difficult, so you don't have to worry about expressing that specifically in Matlab syntax. Right, with the else statement, again, we simply just do not have a condition for the else. So let's talk about a couple things about the if statements that will help us as we're starting to write and include these in our Matlab scripts. So you can use multiple else if statements within a single if structure. So for instance, if we had a menu statement where we were asking what the day was, okay, you would want to do something different based on what value the user selected. For that, you can have multiple else if statements to check to see what value the user had selected and then do something based on that selection. So here we say, what day is today? The user can select Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday. So if the user selected Monday, the answer would be 1, and we could say today is not Monday. Apparently, we are viewing this video on Wednesday, right? Because you can see there for that second else if statement, if the answer is equal to 3, then we display that as correct. So if the user selected answer 1, we would do what's in the if statement. If the user selected Tuesday or answer 2, we would do what's in the first else if, and so on. Okay. You can also put if statements inside of other if statements. So for instance, if you wanted to ask a sequence of questions where the next question that you asked depended on what the user answered in the first question. For example, you could ask what the temperature outside is and whether it's precipitating. So if the temperature is greater than 50 degrees and it's not precipitating, well, it's a nice day, you should go outside. Otherwise, that means that it is warm enough to go outside, but it might be raining or something like that. So you go outside, but you're probably going to get wet. If the temperature is less than 50 degrees, it's too cold, you should just stay inside regardless of whether it's precipitating, right? So we can see that we have that if structure, in this case an if-else structure, inside of the if. Okay, so really you can put anything you want as the Matlab commands inside of an if, or inside of an else, or inside of an else if. All right, and again, I've already said this multiple times, but do not include a condition on the else statement. It doesn't make any sense. Okay, the else statement is always going to be the opposite of whatever the if or whatever the set of if and else if conditions are. Okay, you never want to actually have a statement there. You can actually mess up your program by putting a statement there, because it will execute that and treat it like a regular Matlab command and not as a condition for an if structure. So that brings us to the end of this video. Hopefully you now have a little bit of information about how to use the if structure.